I told you. Yeah! Goblin Slayer back, baby!
You have just tuned in to the Mag Nerd Podcast, your home for everything in music, anime, and gaming.
What is up, guys? Shono the King here, back with another video, and today I'm bringing you my review for Goblin Slayer Episode 4. I told you. I said last week that was a setup chapter for you guys. It was just introducing the squad, letting you know everybody what they can do. We got a little bit of taste at the beginning, but like I said, I know it's been slow, but Goblin Slayer came back swinging in this episode. Without further ado, let's jump into this review. So, I remember when I first read these, this covers 3 chapters, okay? So, I remember when I was reading these 3 chapters and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. The art style, the composition of how the panels look, it was just amazing. And again, the kind of action that I enjoy is the no holds barred, cutthroat, raw, gritty stuff. And that's exactly what we got in this episode. We didn't get a lot of differentiation from the manga in this actual episode, which is actually really great. So let's just get into the details. So the Goblin Slayer squad is staking out this castle, or this shrine, where they're hunting down goblins. And you saw at the end of last episode, Elf, she was able to kind of pull off that Legolas like pew, and just curve the wind and just like kill those 2 goblins with one shot, to where the dwarf kind of was like, yo, was that magic? And she's like, yeah. To someone like you, proficiency could always look like magic. Basically just saying that she's mastered the art of shooting a bow so well that some of her shots could be done, look so good that you would think that it was magic. Because again, just the way that it curved in the wind, and was able to kind of come back and just like take out those goblins. So that was actually really cool. So they actually go into the actual cave, and they're kind of just like going along, just trying to scope out exactly what they're going to be dealing with. And again, I kind of like the camaraderie between the 2 of them. Again, this is their first adventure together, but you can already tell that these guys are all well suited to know each other. They just like covering each other's weaknesses. It's a very good team just from the jump. Now, we get to an intersection where we meet up with our first victim. It was an elf who had went in there on her own adventure, apparently, to try to hunt down this goblin force, and she got captured. We don't know how long she was there, but we know that the Goblin Slayer can kind of smell her and sense her out. That's why he was able to kind of go right when the dwarf told them that, the enemy's to the left. He said, we need to go right. It's almost like he knew that with that smell and just where the elf was. So they kind of go there, find this elf, and this elf, unfortunately, is in a bad way. She is been tortured. You can kind of see how the whole, if you're looking at it from that profile side, the whole right side of her body has basically been mutilated. They left her left side alone, but the goblins were basically like carving her up. And again, you don't see it in the show, but in the manga itself, you kind of see how they like cut off her nipple and just like basically gashed her up, her whole right hand side of her body pretty bad, and God knows what else they did to her. But it was pretty bad. So again, like I said, it wasn't a huge deal that they didn't really show all of that in the actual anime. But again, just to kind of give you guys context of how bad what they did to her. And again, in the actual anime, you actually did get a little bit. You can kind of see the knife wounds that they kind of put in her in the actual anime. So they did kind of make it. They kind of express how bad it was. So that kind of got the other elf really pissed, because she throws up, and you can kind of, and actually that's what I did like a lot about this episode, because they didn't really convey it as much in the manga, how rank it was in that room. Like, apparently that room was just filled with nothing but goblin shit and just waste and excrement and just bones, and it was just horrible. Like, again, you're just puking from just being in there. So imagine being an elf, being taken advantage of, being mutilated, and having to smell that constantly. We don't know how long she'd been in there, so it was pretty bad. So that kind of pumps up Elf, and she's like, yeah, I'm ready to go now. Like, fuck these goblins, I'm ready to kill them. So she's like hyped and ready to go, and then she tends to go on a tear, and that's when we kind of get the first glimpse at the teamwork of the group. So what happens is they do go back to the left and they stumble upon the huge nest of goblins. They are all sleeping. And again, this is where the expertise of Goblin Slayer comes in. Because he knows how to hunt goblins and he knows his teams and what kind of spells they have remaining, he knows how to come up with a plan. It's never about gambling with him. Like, he is always strategically planning, or he at least attempts to do that all the time. So what his mindset is like, all right, we're gonna use the dwarf's ability to kind of put people into a stupor, so it kind of make them almost drunk, the goblins, and then he goes with the protection of the princess. She decides that she's going to use one of her room abilities, to kind of silence the goblins so they can't scream. So they're in a stupor, they fall asleep from the dwarf, and they can't really scream out or just call for help because the priestess, she used her ability as well to make sure that they couldn't talk. That puts them to sleep and in their ability not to scream, and then they can just kind of go in there and like slaughter these goblins slow and methodically. And I love that. I love seeing the teamwork. I love seeing just how structured everybody is in this actual show. It's amazing. Now, one of the other things that I really enjoyed in this episode, so we get to the point where they're going through and they're stabbing and they're killing the zombies, and the elf is literally, you can see her just taking her frustration out on one of these goblins, and she's just stabbing and stabbing and stabbing, and she notices that her hands are like caked with blood, her weapon is caked with blood, and it's not as effective on the goblins that she's seeing. So she kind of looks over the Goblin Slayer to see what he's doing, and you notice that he stabs a goblin after he used that same knife a couple of times, and then what he does is he takes the weapon off the goblin and uses it against them as well. So then she kind of realizes, she's like, oh, again, yeah, this is what you can learn from a seasoned adventurer who's just done nothing but hone his craft to killing goblins. So for her, she's like, as much as he's dedicated and how sometimes he can kind of go overboard, there's a lot to glean from him. There's a lot that you can learn from Goblin Slayer by just watching him work. So of course she picks up the knife and then she starts to stab him again, and then we get the big introduction. Like, let me just pause what I'm doing here. I'm actually rewatching the episode as well as just so I can keep it fresh in my head. So this was actually the moment. As a matter of fact, let me gotta get them electrolytes in. So this is when we get introduced to the Goblin. So I'm sorry, not the Goblin, the Orc. Who, the Orc? I remember when I read about the Orc in the manga, and I was just like, holy shit, this dude is huge. Like, I remember when I was reading this thing, and I was just like, oh my god, I can't wait till to see this is animated. I mean, it was, and again, the animation team did not disappoint. Like, he looked as big and oppressive as anything that you could have seen in the actual manga itself. I fucking loved it. This guy came out like a boss. Now, difference between the manga and the anime. In the anime, you kind of get a backstory on the ogre, and apparently the ogre was one of the members of the Knights of the Round Table, and he was such a strong member that he had like a battle shield, and he became one with his weapon, and something convoluted, and that's kind of which led him to become the ogre. Or that particular ogre, because again, I guess there are regular ogres, but this guy was kind of special because you can see that he was just no regular ogre. He was able to use like incantations and use magic abilities. So that was actually kind of different too, because again, usually Goblin Slayer was used to fighting these, thrust bucket, goblins. And even with the shamans, you never saw the shamans using any magic. So it's just like, this is the first time he's ever fought somebody that was, number one, that powerful, but could also use spells. And you found out that that ogre was given that goblin army from the actual Demon King. So this is the first time that our Goblin Slayer team has come up against one of the Demon Lord's subordinates. So this fight has a lot of significance going into the next chapter of the saga of Goblin Slayer. So, we see, Ogre Sama show up, and, he is not fucking around. He's like, what the fuck you do to my goblins? I'm about to fuck y'all up, And we kind of get our first team battle, and it was absolutely incredible. Like, guys, I mean, absolutely incredible. I mean, the action, the colors, the palette, like how everything turned out, the sound of the ogre itself, just his moveset, like, and again, you see the progression of Priestess. Like, Priestess, come on, y'all know Priestess was clutch this episode. You know Priestess was clutch this episode. They would be French fried and fricasseed by now if it was not for Priestess coming up with that barrier two times. So Priestess stepped her game up. Before, when the series first started, she only knew two spells. She knew protection. She knew barrier, and she knew. No, she only knew the healing spell, and then she knew again holy light. So holy light, and then the heal. So now she has holy light, the heal, protection, and she has a barrier ability as well. That's what she used when she trapped the goblins inside that tree, the last episode where they got smoked out. So she, not only did she learn new moves, but she can now use her abilities up to 4 times. And she ended up using those abilities all 4 times because, again, she used her ability to stop the goblins from talking. She then used her protection 2 times, and she actually did, and then she actually healed the elf as well. So those were the 4 runes that she used in an actual battle. She healed the elf, and she didn't actually heal Goblin Slayer. She gave him a potion, and she gave him a stamina potion. So that was the difference between potions and her using her ability. So she gave him a potion, a stamina, and a healing potion. That's how he was able to recover. She didn't use her ability on him. She used that rune on the goblin. On the goblin. Then she used it on the elf that had got hurt, and then she used 2 protection spells to help the team out. Then she was pretty much done. Now, we also got from the dwarf, we saw some of his abilities, and I think when they were not practicing, they were strategizing, he was able to use his ability 4 to 5 times. We also saw Lizard Man come in clutch with his Bone Warriors, and even Elf was kind of like far away, just like, he hit Ogre in the face, and then you can just tell how strong Ogre was, because even though she shot him in the eye with the arrow, once he pulled that arrow out, his eye immediately healed back up, so he automatically had auto heal. So you knew right there that whatever they were going to try to use to beat this guy had to obliterate him almost immediately, because if not, any small wounds that they could inflict on him were just going to heal. So Team Goblin Slayer, of course, and then we get to the point where we get that callback that I was talking about. And I talked about it last week. Again, like I said, I think I did a good job of not spoiling it for you guys, but we do get that callback, and we're talking about how when we were talking about the scroll. Now, this is probably the biggest difference between the manga and the anime, and again, I do kind of appreciate how they did it in the manga a little bit better. Not to say that the anime did it wrong, but I kind of appreciate the suspense that they gave us in the manga. So, as we all know now, that what happened was that Goblin Slayer had in that scroll is that scroll was a warp scroll. And usually what people do with that warp scroll is they use it to get out of tough situations. It's kind of like Pokemon. So, if you're in the cave in Pokemon and you're going against Zubats for like 2 hours trying to level up your character, and you run out of repels and you don't want to have to worry about getting out of the cave in Pokemon, all you have to do is use a magic rope, and it'll basically teleport you out of the cave and take you in front of the nearest Pokemon Center. That's what people use to escape caves. In this case, with Goblin Slayer, that scroll, those things are very rare, but what adventurers usually use it for is that you can basically have that scroll teleport you to a certain place. So what you can say is, on one end of the scroll, I want this to lead to my bedroom, and then all you have to do is lay that scroll out, a portal will open up, and then you can just jump into that portal and it'll take you to your house. That's usually what people use it for. Not with Goblin Slayer. What he did was, and again, just the thought process of this man is just bananas, because again, when I saw it happen, I was like, there was no way that I would ever be able to think that he would use it for that purpose. So what Goblin Slayer does is the man teleports the bottom of the ocean inside of a scroll so he can use it to wipe out an entire goblin nest. That's what the big reveal was from last week, when we got a lot of the explanation and the kind of foreshadowing. We got the payoff this episode because you find out that's what that scroll was about. It was basically pressurized water, salt water from the bottom of the ocean that he put into that scroll so he could wipe out an entire nest of goblins. But he ended up using it on the ogre. Now, what I feel like the manga did better is kind of explain how it happened. So in the actual manga, you kind of see it's the same thing. He kind of walks up to the ogre after he's healed by the by the priestess, and he does do the same thing where like you idiot or you fool or whatever. But then what you do is you in the very next panel, you just see the ogre lying there, shocked, just staring up at the moon, and he's kind of like, what the hell happened? And then you just kind of see like blood spurt out of his mouth, and then you kind of reveal that he's been cut in half, but you don't know what the hell happened. You just see his body just lying there, and then as you're reading it, I'm like, yo, what the fuck happened? Like, what happened to him? Like, you get that like kind of like suspense, like, yo, what the fuck did Goblin Slayer just do to him? Like, I saw him pull out the scroll, but I don't know what happened. So that's kind of what I enjoyed more in the actual manga. And then what they do is they do a quick flashback to Goblin Slayer talking to the witch, and kind of they explain what she did. You know how the witch is telling him. We didn't even end up getting that in the anime, but what we get in the manga is you kind of get a little bit more explanation as to what he did. And he basically asked her, "Hey, I want you to tie this scroll to the bottom of the ocean, and I want you to put in the scroll," and of course she's like, "Yeah, I'll do it for a price." They basically explain what happened, and then what they do in the manga is they then jump back to the moment where Goblin Slayer unleashes the scroll. So you see the ogre use his incantation for fireball again, and just as he's about to throw, you see Goblin Slayer open up that scroll, and you see the fireball get cut in half, and then you see the goblin's hand get cut in half, and then his finger, then his arm, and then you see his whole body get cut in half. So in the manga, they kind of play it out, and it's amazing how they do it. But, and again, not complaining about the episode. I still love the episode, how it turned out. I'm just saying I kind of like the suspense that they use in the manga on this particular part better. Not saying it was bad, just saying that the manga portion of it was better. But either way, watching Goblin Slayer kind of walk up to that ogre and just like stab him in the head and just like rip it open and just basically insult this guy and basically tell him that goblins were stronger than you. What? And you know that this ogre was prideful too, man. You know this ogre was prideful. So a passing blow to tell him that goblins are tougher than you. Oh man. It's just ridiculous. So Ogre gets dealt with pretty handedly. Goblin Slayer is the victor. This show, man, it's so good. And again, it's just getting started, folks. We're just getting started because again, like I said, we're gonna have a little bit of a lull. Because again, after you get this kind of action-packed episode, we gotta get back to that development cycle again. We gotta build up the next hunt and kind of figure out what's gonna go on next. But again, I promise you, I will definitely stay tuned. But this episode is gonna get a 5 out of 5 for me. This is probably I'll say it's on par with episode 1. As far as like adaptation goes, I do enjoy this episode just as much as I enjoyed episode 2. Episode 1, episode 2, you guys, if you saw my review, I was very heated about that. And even though I did notice a little bit of cutoffs in the actual violence department, and again, I'm not saying that looks like they're censoring it, because again, you can see certain scenes where they're stabbing up the goblins where you can tell that the camera itself had been clipped and it had been moved up a little bit, where they basically moved the bottom half of the violence down so you couldn't really see the goblins getting like shanked up, like stuff like that. I pay attention to stuff like that, so that's why when I see it, that's not an edit to me. Like, that's not something that shouldn't have been there. That looks like somebody that edited it on the back end. That's why I sometimes complain about. And again, we won't know for sure until we actually get the Blu-ray release, and then that's kind of when we'll figure out exactly what is real and what isn't. So Team Goblin Slayer prevails over the ogre, and they're exhausted. Like, they're wiped. The elves that actually got the other girl, rescued, they kind of come in and, they kind of rescue everybody and kind of cart them back to their village. And everybody's just kind of passed out. Like, Goblin Slayer's passed out, the dwarf is passed out, Lizard Man is passed out. The only two that are still up and active are Priestess and Elf. And they're kind of talking back and forth before they actually kind of pass out themselves. So, great episode, guys. I really enjoyed it. I'm 2 thumbs up. If you enjoyed the video, comment in the section below. Let me know what you thought about the episode. Thumbs up the video. Subscribe to the channel. And again, of course, stay tuned for more Magnerd podcast episodes coming soon. This is Shut Off the King. Have an awesome day, guys.